forget, and So before I start my talks now, I always want to start with acknowledging that which gives us all life, which is the earth, the water, the air, and the fire. And so often we can forget the simple things in life that every one of us in this room totally depends on. And so coming into kind of like that simple, practical actions, I honour them for my work and for all of us for being here. And thank you all for choosing to come today. So we have here, anything simple, a little rock and a little bowl of water, a candle, which is not a petroleum candle held in aluminium. And, so often when we look at the simple things like lighting a candle, what's it made from? We live in this world of so much stuff, cheap stuff. Tea lights are a really good example. We look at, beautiful fire. But when I look at a tea light, I see petroleum and aluminium, and I see the mining that happens behind that. And there are many other alternatives. Here we have an orange peel as the base. I know people that are making it in shells, in all sorts of ways to actually hold the different oils that we can burn. But as we know, we have to move away from fossil fuels, and candles are just one of those. So anyway, just to bring the fire, to give thanks to this great sun and the warmth that the fire provides us with. I'm just going to move this over a little bit, just so I can see you all. I'm not standing behind the computer. Okay. So you see my job title, Solutionologist. It was a bit of a kind of tongue-in-cheek because I've been working with mycologists and biologists and geologists, and I was coordinating all of them. And I thought, well, hang on, I want to be an ologist too. And so what do? I focus on solutions. So therefore, I must be a solutionologist. And, it was kind of a bit of fun using this term for a while, until I received an email which said cease and desist. It was a legal notification saying that this word is actually trademarked, so I'm not allowed to use it, as you can see. And so I wrote back to the woman in America who had trademarked this name, and I said, well, hey, right now we need as many solutionologists as possible. How can you possibly want to stop people? I want to start a school of solutionology. And I really look forward to hearing from you, and I never heard back. So I continue to use the word and encourage anybody else that wants to be a solutionologist. I have actually changed it now to just being a solutionist because it's just a little bit easier. But the story of how people can patent and trademark all sorts of things. So I'm going to get through a huge amount of information today, so it'll be a massive download. It's in 3 parts. So there's myself, and what does it mean to be a solutionist? What have I been doing? What's my history and my work? And then where do I think we need to be going? Looking at the amazing science of biomimicry, and then coming into the individual. Well, what do we all need to do to be a part of this flourishing world? I love the title that you've chosen for this event. So, first, obviously, acknowledging as well the indigenous people that I work with in the Amazon. And as we said, I started there in 2000, so I can't believe it's been 19 years that I have been working with the people. And these incredible wisdom holders that now, all of a sudden, science is realising that most of the medicines that we take has come from these places. And we're losing the knowledge, because in their indigenous tongue, a plant's name will tell you what it does. Now they've lost that, and they're all starting to speak Spanish, so we're losing indigenous languages. And with that, we lose so much information. So it's really kind of important as well for me, when I'm working with indigenous groups, is to really encourage them to speak their own language to their children. Because if they don't, and they just all speak Spanish, there's so much that's being lost culturally and language is a massive one of those. So this is how I started. 6 months I was in this dugout canoe. I was 8 hours from the nearest village, deep in the Amazon, and my job was to film the endangered pink river dolphins. So that's what I did. I was in this boat, I would go amongst the flooded forest and look and to prove that the dolphins lived in a lagoon where the oil companies wanted to drill. So there were 5 environmental organisations from around the world that had come together to create a biosphere reserve and a corridor between 2 big national parks, Cuyabeno and Yasuni. And this area was in the middle. And so that was what the job was, to prove, and it was one of the most difficult things I've ever done, because river dolphins, they don't just jump like ocean dolphins. So they don't have a very, a fin that's easy to see. So when they would kind of leave the water, you would think, was that an anaconda or a caiman or a paichi? But I had to prove that actually it was a dolphin. And so 6 months, I got 4 shots to show that actually, yes, it was a dolphin, it had a blowhole, it opened up, and it was in this lagoon. It couldn't just be anywhere. We had to show that these dolphins were living in this lagoon. So this is how I started. And I ended up going on a variety of boats after this 6 months, all the way down the Amazon to Brazil, from Ecuador to Brazil, to research the effect of the oil industry on the indigenous people and on the environment. So this was this epic journey, and I made a film called Blood of the Amazon, and that was to give the people a voice, for them to tell their story about what's happened. So for a long time I was kind of screening the film and talking about the film a lot as part of this journey for me to find out, because I really didn't know what was happening down there. So this was, yes, my kind of mode of transport. And just seeing some of the size of some of these trees down there, I mean, it is magnificent. And without a person, you wouldn't be able to kind of, really kind of get the magnificence of the forest. But the craziness as well. I mean, the madness of some of the things that I would see every day. I pretty much could guarantee that every day I would see a different insect. And, that diversity, and I don't know, does anybody know what this is?
Some kind of moth.
Well, it looks like a moth. It was a moth, but now it's a butterfly. And then, now it's a butterfly. Now it's a mushroom. So the mushroom has actually killed the butterfly and transformed it. They're called cordyceps fungi. And you can see kind of clearly in this. And so this is an insect in the wrong place at the wrong time. And what happens, this is the intelligence of nature. It's actually it's a very clear explanation which the BBC did on the cordyceps ant. And there's an ant, and it's acting very strange, waving its arms and legs around, and the other ants come from the termite mound, they pick it up, they move it as far away from the nest as possible, and because they can see it's in some way kind of tripping, it's acting very strange. That ant will then climb the tallest tree, sink its mandibles into the bark on the top of the tree. The mushroom will then grow straight up out the top of its head, kill the ant. But the mushroom's purpose is to spread itself through the forest. If you're a little tiny mushroom, you don't spread yourself very far when you're on the floor. But you get to the top of a tree, when you sporulate, your spores go far and wide. So this method of fungi called the cordyceps infects all sorts of creatures, all sorts of insects. And that's one example of what it's done to this moth or butterfly. It's transformed it into a fungi. So, this is what I fell in love with, this absolute beauty of the Amazon. And this is what I was seeing, these pristine lagoons. And I had no idea about the other side. And I think many tourists that go to Ecuador get taken to the national parks and they see the beauty of the jungle, but they don't see the dark side. And that was what my interest was as well. So this is what I started to see, lots of oil spills. And they say, in fact, that it's the worst oil spills on the planet are in the Ecuadorian Amazon. But because it's hidden, and they're just indigenous people, they're just hidden in the jungle, we don't need to know about it. We all know what happened with the BP Gulf oil spill. But that was a drop in the ocean in comparison to what's actually happened in the Amazon. So this is, it's constant. The spills, this is a river that's just a couple of years ago that I saw, and when the water levels drop, you see what the riverbanks look like. That's what they look like. And so throughout the Amazon, if this has happened in the headwaters, it's gone all the way down the Amazon. And so there's not really any places left that haven't been contaminated from the oil industry now, that are throughout the banks of the Amazon River. And this is one of the pits, it's a part of it, it's about a third of the pit, of one of the Texaco. There's 1,000 of them, just under 998 pits that Texaco left behind. So when Texaco started to drill in the 60s and 70s, they just dumped it all in the rivers. And the rivers started floating with fish. And the Ecuadorian government said to Texaco, you can't just dump it into the rivers. You need to build pits, you need to build holding pits to put your waste in. And so that's what they did. They made these big pits, and they never lined them with concrete or anything. They just dug a hole, and they put their waste. And the waste isn't just oil, there's also radioactive substances and heavy metals. And they sink down into the ground, and then they come up in the water table. So this is what we have. We have these 1,000 pits which started in the 70s, they're still there today. It's the largest environmental lawsuit, 30,000 indigenous people versus Texaco, which is actually now Chevron Texaco. This case has been like this massive case which has just gone, how many people in this room that haven't already heard me speak know about this? It's incredible that such a huge ecocide has happened and we just don't know about it. And so this is the story. So it's like I've got to know the problems to be able to work on the solutions. And it's such a big problem that nobody wants to deal with it. And Chevron Texaco do not want to pay. They've been ordered to pay $3.6 billion. They've lost the case. And they need to pay. But they just don't pay. They keep appealing. And then they lose an appeal, and they appeal again, and they lose that appeal. And that's the story of what has been going on down there. So this is kind of the background of my work in Ecuador. And you see the effect throughout. People still eat the fish, they eat the chickens, everything's totally affected. Where they live, they're surrounded by the infrastructure of these gas flares. So the madness, I show it in my film Blood of the Amazon, that the people are going to fill up their gas bottles to do their cooking. And they'll queue for hours and hours and hours to fill up their gas bottle, and they'll get there and there'll be no gas left. And right next to their house is a massive gas flare. And it's totally unregulated. So there are just these giant gas flares throughout the Amazon where they're drilling for oil. And it's like, well, hang on, then on the other side of the world we're talking about fracking and let's look for more gas. And it's like, hang on, we've got plenty of gas, but it's just being flared. It's not actually being captured. This is, are we really living in an intelligent world? And we call ourselves Homo sapiens. But I don't know what about the sapien anymore. There doesn't seem to be much wisdom in us. And so this is kind of an example. And then down the road, I see this. Anybody got an idea what this is? This is a method of capturing gas from human waste and pigs. It's a biogas. This is a simple biogas system. So basically, the toilets and all the pigs, it just kind of comes down into this long plastic, and you see the pipe that goes up around the gas just goes straight up the pipe, straight to the kitchen, and the women are cooking on it. It's like, hang on, this is so simple. Anaerobic digestion and biogas is part of the future. We've got plenty of gas. We've got plenty of waste. If you think of each one of us, how much we produce individually, it's a lot. And we're just flushing it down the toilet. This is another example of not intelligent beings. Anaerobic digestion, which will be the future, we'll be able to not only see the potential of the gas that we need, but also the byproduct is compost that you put back onto the fields. And that's what they've worked out in this really simple system here. So, this is what we're left with. This is a modern day cleanup. This is a recent spill, and this is what they do. I mean, we're not talking about high technology here. Put a bit of straw in there, a little bit on the edges, and that's how the oil industry are dealing with the spills down there at the moment. And this is what I've seen a lot of. A lot of this with children covered in skin infections, because the children swim in the rivers, they drink the water, it's used constantly, and so there's a lot. They say, in fact, it's one of the highest childhood leukemia rates in the world is the indigenous children in the Amazon. And that is totally caused from Chevron Texaco spills that they still have not cleaned up. So that's the big problem. That's the situation, that's the truth, that's the facts. And you can have a look now. I've kind of pointed you in that direction. Look up Texaco in the Amazon and you'll find out all the information. So the first project that I founded was the Amazon Microrenewal Project. And I brought together a team of scientists that were working on mycoremediation, which is the use of fungi to break down oil spills. We've since not only been working on mycoremediation, but looking at bioremediation, phytoremediation, the use of bacteria, of plants, and of fungi to break down contaminated spills. So we would go to the pits themselves and take some of that oil and that mess from there, and we would take it back and we would start to do small-scale experiments to see how we can do this. I mean, I saw a woman stand up like I am now, and she held up the book, How Mushrooms Can Save the World. And I thought it was a joke. And she's like, oh, no, mushrooms can break down plastic, and they can break down oil spills, and they can... I'm like, really? Well, you come with me, I'll show you some oil spills. And you tell me whether there's a native mushroom in the Amazon that would be able to do the same here, because we've got a big problem, and we need to start looking at, one day, we need to clean that mess up. So that's what we've been doing. And the best mushroom for the job is Pleurotus austriatus, which is the common oyster mushroom that you can buy in a supermarket, and it's a yummy edible mushroom. But why that mushroom's so good is that it also helps to absorb heavy metals. So the job of a mushroom in the forest is to break down carbon. That's what they do. And oil is a hydrocarbon. So at a molecular level, the enzymes that are in the fungi, it's the mycelium. We're not interested in the fruiting body. We're interested in the roots, the mycelium. That's what creates the enzymes that breaks apart the hydrogen and the carbon. And it just happens to be that Pleurotus austriatus also is able to absorb heavy metals. So of course the question then is, well, what happens once you've then got all these mushrooms and all this mycelium filled with heavy metals? There's two ways. There's the intensive heat, beat and treat, which we could actually extract the metals back out of it. Or there's a kind of a more low-tech permaculture, which is we'll turn it into a compost and grow hardwood trees. And the trees use metals in their growth. We wouldn't want to do a fruiting tree because we don't know if it would actually bring it through to the fruit. We don't really need to do that experiment either. So at the moment, that's where we've been looking. And so we've done a number of different experiments, looking also at different substrates. What do we grow the mushrooms on as well? Different kinds of sawdust. So this is what the rivers look like. So on one side, the big picture is we need to deal with cleaning up. We have to have a vision of how are we going to clean this mess up. And that's where the Amazon Microrenewal Project has come in, and we've had various different people over the years that have been involved. But then I just felt like, well, hang on, but right now, the people just need water. It's all very well just looking at the big picture, we've got to clean it up. But my kind of passion was, I want to help these people. I feel a part of the problem. I've flown, I've driven, I've used this oil. It's my culture that has created this problem. So therefore, we also have a responsibility to create the solution as well. And although they live in the rainforest, they don't collect the rain. They always collect from the streams and the rivers. That's their culture. is to go down to the stream and collect the water. And that's what they keep doing, even though they do know that it's contaminated. That's what they do. So myself and another woman, Yvonne, she's Ecuadorian, and she has an organisation called the, I'm about to speak in Spanish then, the Committee of Human Rights. And so Yvonne and myself, she knows the poorest people in the community that are most disadvantaged and are drinking the most contaminated water. Those that live right next to the Texaco pits or right next to contaminated rivers. So what we do is we choose like 20, 25 families a year to build water systems. And it's also this kind of girl power thing that we show that women can build. The guys have to go and bring the wood in. That's the story. It's like, I don't believe in doing it all for you. You bring the wood and we'll bring all the bits. So they will go and bring the wood in, and then together we have what's called a minga, which in the indigenous language, every month they will all help everybody in their community. And they'll go and help one person in their house, maybe fix their roof, and then together next thing they'll do is they'll clean the football pitch with their machetes, and then next month it's fix a bridge, and they do these community work days. So this was kind of an extension to that. Well, let's have a minga to build the families that really need it, rainwater systems. And what's important is it has to be from ingredients that can be sourced from local hardware stores, so that the people then can actually build it themselves. So here's some of the families that I've been working with, and that's an example of one of the systems. And every year I've been developing it and kind of changing it. So you'll see there, we put the gutters up on the roof. It comes down into like a first flush. So where's that little bit here? You don't want the first bit of rain because of all those gas flares. They're dumping acid rain, and so that powder will sit on the roof. And so that means that after the first rain, it'll go straight down into that with a little cap, and it will clean the roof. So we don't want that first bit of water. You take the cap off and all the dirty water comes out, and then it carries on through a filter. And that big bin has in there gravel, sand, and charcoal. And so it's a simple kind of filtration system that they're able to kind of look after it themselves, and then afterwards they also have to put a roof on, and like a thatched roof. So these are some of the examples of what this simple system looks like, and it's meant that lots of them are able to copy it and replicate it. And in fact, last year I did make a little video of the kind of, it's 11:11. I actually didn't realise that was going to happen. I have various clocks around the place set at 11:11, and you can do it with me. I just have a minute, if ever I see 11:11, to just think of world peace. So if we could just have a moment, this wasn't planned. So back to the water systems. So this is really what they look like. And in some villages, people say to me, why don't you put your logo on, on the systems? Because there's whole villages which have all got my tanks in them. And it's like, well, it's not about me putting my logo on the systems. It's about you having water. And they often think that, I must be with the company, because why would I just go and help them? And so then they'll say to me, you're not with the company? Oh, so you're with the church? Are you a missionary? And I used to say, no, I'm not a missionary. But then I was like, actually, yes, I am. I'm on a mission. And I'm a missionary for Pachamama, which is what they relate to, this spirit of the earth. And that's, my service is to help wherever I can. And then, of course, we turn to the issue of plastic. So it's all of these environmental issues, it's like there's a problem and we have to look at the solution as well. What can we do? What's the practical way of dealing with this? And thankfully, hail David Attenborough, it's actually, we're starting to seriously talk about the issue of plastic, and I've been banging on for over 10 years about, the problem, and it seems like there's traction. But although we talk about the problem of plastic, we're not talking about many of the solutions, apart from obviously not using the stuff. But what do we do with where the environment is already filled with all this plastic? we have to start looking at, okay, we have all this. The world is absolutely filled with plastic, and there has to be a way. I mean, it is this precious substance, it's petroleum. And, when we look at, and it actually surprises me, in schools, it's quite shocking. I'll pick up a piece of paper and I'll say to the children, what's this made out of? And they'll say, a tree. And then I'll pick up a plastic bottle and I'll squeeze it and I'll say, what's this made out of? Silence. Don't seem to be teaching what plastic is made out of. And it's like, actually, when we get this oil out of the ground and we bring it up and we turn it into a single-use plastic to be thrown away, if we go back to the slides of the oil spills, this is all totally related. And so, I've been asked around the world to kind of help them in communities where they're just drowning in plastic, and they either burn it or they'll throw it in the river, because basically, if you don't have a rubbish man, that's what you do. And, we live in this world where we just send it away. And, obviously there is no way on our planet, but we feel good because we can eat as many pots of hummus as we want and we can put it in our recycling bin and it goes away. And so we can just eat and consume as much plastic because we feel good about it, because we can actually recycle it. We don't look at where's that plastic come from, how much energy is it going to take to actually recycle it, how much is that going to be transported and shipped. In fact, I was speaking in Chichester, the assembly rooms recently. They opened their refill, to refill your water bottles. And there was a man from the council, and I pointed him out in the audience. I said, you can tell us, from your point of your recycling bin, that plastic hummus pot, how many times does it travel? And he started to count them off, and I counted them on my finger, 7 times. From one depot to another depot to another depot to another depot. That's just the. I didn't turn it off. I put it on the snooze. So it's like 7 times this pot travels around. So is recycling actually as ecological as we think that it is? We just don't challenge it because we are not challenged about consumerism or where plastic comes from or where it's going to. So here we are in a world absolutely full of plastic, and people just don't know what to do. And I'd be saying, no, don't burn it, it's really bad for the children, they're all breathing in all this plastic, and it's really not good. Well, what do? We're told to not put it in the river, but the river takes it all away. Yeah, the river takes it to the ocean, but what do? So, we see these awful images of these creatures now which don't even, these birds don't even fledge the nest because the mothers are bringing them back plastic instead of food. So we've got to this situation now where we're eating plastic through fish, and it's like this constant thing of how much even our clothes, that we thought that fleeces that were made out of plastic bottles were great, they were environmentally friendly, but now we know that any synthetics creates microfibers, and every time we wash synthetic clothes, all these tiny microfibers end up in the ocean as well, which go into the fish. So now we're eating our clothing. So, it's just this world that we're filling with plastic on a large, obvious way, and also on this kind of like microscopic. So I started off thinking, okay, we've got to focus on the solutions. I'd heard about eco-bricks, and so I thought, okay, in some countries, I'm not recommending it here because we can deal with our rubbish, but in places where you can't, this is a way of put all the rubbish into a bottle. And I do competitions at schools because, if you put up a football or a bike, well, you have got every kid out there filling these bottles. And that's a quick way I can get a whole village cleaned up in a weekend. So, unfortunately, that's the way you do it. And so from that kind of competition of getting them to fill their bottles up, and you can see this is one example of all the kids there with their bottles, and teaching them about jamming all this plastic. I mean, even I've been teaching them about putting batteries in bottles because so many batteries are thrown into the rivers. And so what do you do with them? Yes, we can take them somewhere to have batteries recycled, but if you can't, well, hey, let's just put them in a bottle for now, because in the future, you will be able to. Everywhere will be able to. They will want those precious metals. And so, at the moment, it's like, let's just contain things in bottles. And so by making these eco-bricks, these plastic bottles, I started to build And I'd built like benches, and this was a really horrible place where people waited for the bus, and there was just rubbish everywhere. And the community said, oh, could we build something here? And so it was like 280 bottles. We built this bench. And then I went back the following year, and they built this beautiful garden all around it. And they said they were going to build 72 more of these benches. This is up through the Andes. So you can plant the seed and show people. It's very simple. Hey, like, let's just build something out of it. As much as I hate cement, which has its whole ecological nightmare within itself, plastic, we need to do something with it. And at the moment, they would just be building with cement breeze blocks. So these are some of the examples of the buildings. This was building a restaurant, so this was in the process. And this was the first ecological restaurant in the Amazon, made out of 3,200 plastic bottles filled with rubbish. So this was quite a project. And I got the local mayor to support me. And as I said, the reason actually I built this restaurant, because I wanted a cup of coffee. And I know this is quite an extreme way of, because in the Amazon, everyone grows coffee, but you cannot get a cup of local coffee. You can only get instant Nescafe. And I don't support Nescafe. I'm not going to drink it. And it's like, hang on, everybody here grows coffee and cacao. When it's like, well, hang on, where's it all going? It is all exported. All the chocolate, all the coffee is totally exported. There is nowhere to be able to buy a local bar of chocolate or a local cup of coffee. So the idea of this ecological restaurant was somewhere where we would support local farmers, that we would only sell products that had been grown locally. We would sell this famous drink called mocha, which nobody in the Amazon has ever heard of. And I said, actually, it's the taste of the Amazon. It's chocolate, coffee, milk, and sugar. You ask somebody in the West, everyone knows what mocha is. We can't grow any of the ingredients, but we can consume it. But there, where it all grows, no one's heard. And so, I was kind of on telly and on the radio about this famous, what is this drink? Because I'd made a big sign that said, Siente el poder, feel the power. What is it? So, well, you have fresh coffee, fresh chocolate, fresh sugar, that's good. And so that's how we came about building this. And for those of you that don't know, there is the seed of the chocolate tree. And the actual cacao seed itself, inside, talk about the food of gods that chocolate was known as. That's the fruit, it's not the seed. And we just only eat chocolate as just the seed. But the actual fruit itself, when you open that pod, it has this amazing, it's almost kind of like a lychee, white, fluffy kind of pulp inside. And the seeds are inside that. So they just take the seeds out. The fruit itself is just discarded. It's crazy. And it's like, hang on, surely there's a new superfood waiting to happen of this delicious fruit, and it is amazing, but it doesn't transport. You need to know people that grow cacao to be able to experience the fruit firsthand. But that is the seed of the chocolate tree, and and it's a real problem, our consumption, because when we look at deforestation, we often think it's we talk about palm oil and cows, cattle, and soya, but it's actually coffee and chocolate too. I hate to be the bringer of bad news. But it is causing a lot of deforestation to be able for our supply and our needs. So this is another example. This was a health centre. So this is before and that's after. And this health centre, we kind of leave the little window of truth so you can see what it's been built out of. Because otherwise nobody would believe you that this building is totally made out of rubbish. And all the hands on the tree are all the people that worked on building this. So otherwise the health centre would be just built out of breeze blocks, but instead it's been built out of the village's rubbish. So then I was invited to Colombia, to this beach, and this is where the whales go to give birth, or one of the places that the whales go to give birth. And I was so moved when they told me, this group, Eco Pacifico, that the whales come into the bay and they are just swimming through all this rubbish. And they talk about these gyres, and there's the Pacific gyre. So you've got this, kind of vortex of plastic going around and then just being dumped on the Pacific coast. And this part of the Pacific in Colombia is just taking the brunt of all this plastic. I had never seen so much plastic in my life. And they'd invited me to build a community centre out of eco-bricks. And so I turned up, I said, well, if you get about 3,500 bottles filled, I'll come and I'll help you build the centre. And then I saw the beach. I was like, okay, this is not the work of eco-bricks. Eco-bricks are a great solution in small communities where there's only a community's amount of rubbish. There's only so much a community can generate. And if everybody just has one bottle on their kitchen side, it takes a lot to fill one bottle. You jam it in with a stick, you can get a lot of rubbish in there. But when you look at the ocean, it's totally ridiculous. We can't be trying to clean this up by shoving it all in bottles. So I knew that we needed another solution to kind of scale up the size of the problem on the beaches. And so this is where I kind of went to visit some of these machines that chip all the plastic up and they turn it into this like plastic wood. So this is kind of like a large mechanised way of being able to... You've probably seen some of this plastic wood. It's now kind of... They do quite a lot of these picnic tables out of the plastic wood. So I thought, okay, how can we make an industry out of this rubbish? Because really, it's worth something. But this is a huge industrial way of dealing and transforming rubbish into a resource. Trash into treasure. Instead of cutting down trees to get wood, why don't we make plastic wood? Surely that would be a much more sensible thing to be able to do with, because we are keeping on talking about the rubbish, but we are just not talking about what we can do with that which is already out of the ground. Tie it up. And in the plastic wood, it can keep being used for more and more things through its life. Most companies that do this say that they'll give it 30-year lifetime. Well, then in 30 years' time, yes, it started to break down, then it needs to be turned into something else. There's also this, which is the blessed machine. You can put plastic in, and it's pyrolysis, and you can change the dial to petrol, diesel, or kerosene, and you can get the petrol back out of plastic. So I was like, well, this is a great idea. Why aren't we doing this? Hey, all these people driving their boats around, and we could just be clearing up the beaches and changing it all back into petrol and then carry on burning it. But then it's like, well, actually, that's not really, it seems like a good idea when you first hear about it, and it is a way of dealing with it. In fact, in Fukushima, where there was a lot of totally radioactive plastic, all the stuff around, they did take a big machine down there, and they did all the plastic that was left behind, they were able to convert that and burn it. So, there's this times when we need to deal with plastic waste and, through pyrolysis, turn it back into petrol. But really, for me, the absolute priority, when we get oil out of the ground, we need to keep it above ground, and we need to keep it in a system where we keep reutilising it, and it's over and over again. But I think the plastic wood really is a much better solution. And I was speaking to national parks in Colombia, and I said, look, you build loads of boardwalks. There's boardwalks everywhere, wooden boardwalks. It's like, why don't you, make plastic boardwalks? And they were like, wow, this is a great idea. And so these kind of like practical applications that can really help in a situation where it's like, yes, on one hand, I want to help stop deforestation, but on the other side, it's like, let's just deal with what we've got. And then I heard about these guys in Holland that have started up these precious plastic machines. And this is it's an open source. Anybody, anywhere in the world, can download how to build these machines. They're very low cost. They're a small community size scale. And then what you do is you put your plastic in, you chip it, and you melt it down, and you create another mould. If anybody's interested afterwards, this is something that we made out of the plastic bottle tops that we found on the beach last year. So, we just made this kind of like simple tile mould out of some of the rubbish that we collected. So come and have a look at this. So yes, you can make all sorts of like gadgets and gizmos and stuff which they've been making from this machine as well as the plastic wood. So my interest has been kind of encouraging communities to make social enterprises where we could pay people to actually bring the plastic from the environment to the machines. The machines convert it into a saleable product where you then sell the plastic in a new form, which then generates money for the community. So this way you're kind of ticking the boxes: environmental, social, and economical. So these kind of solutions are, and anybody, anywhere in the world that knows where there's an issue with rubbish and poverty, these machines can really help with this. And say it's open source, so my interest has also been working with the universities and telling them about that. So in the Cali University in Colombia, they've built now 4 machines, which is where the beach rubbish that we made that from. And so it's a really great way, if you have contacts anywhere, in the majority world, then, tell them about this machine. And especially for university design and technology students, they want something real to do. It's like, give them these plans and say, hey, well, do you want to help deal with the rubbish in your community? And then finally, my last work in the Amazon, obviously, is dealing with deforestation. And like I say, it's not just cattle and soya. And so another thing I've started really doing in lots of cafes and pleasing us, is the soya. So we need to be having people that are having alternative milks. Don't have soy, have like oat milk, because we grow oats in England, and actually we can process it here. Although I totally say we've also got to stop Tetra Paks. We're focusing a lot on plastic, and we're not focusing on Tetra Paks. And Tetra Paks, I think, is actually worse than plastic, because it's a combination of paper, aluminium, and plastic. They can't really be recycled. They can be downcycled, which is what happens to them. They get turned into construction materials. But separating aluminium, plastic, and paper is a hugely energy-intensive thing. Whereas we can actually just make oat milk. Oats and water, leave it overnight, strain it off, you've made oat milk. And so it comes back to actually just reducing consumption, making it ourselves and questioning. And so in cafes and National Trust, I'm onto the National Trust because they always have soya milk, and it's like, come on, you're really good at supporting British things, so why don't you at least have oat milk rather than soya milk? Because it is a massive problem where it comes from. Trees like this saber tree, they told me they were cutting them down for $500. And I was like, hang on, this tree here, you would cut it down for $500. And I'm like, okay, maybe I can just find $500 and just give them $500 to just not cut this tree down. But who's to say that next year somebody else isn't going to come and cut it down? We have to find a way of being able to support the indigenous people to not cut the forest down. We talk about carbon offsetting and tree planting, which absolutely, yes, we need to do. But before planting trees, we need to stop the destruction of the established trees. I mean, these massive trees, if you want to know what a carbon pump looks like, how much CO2 does a tree like this absorb out of the atmosphere? And you plant a little seedling, it's going to take a long time for that tree to be able to really do the job of sucking in CO2. So the most important thing for me is actually saving the big trees that are there. And so I'm really, really looking for help with this. And I think that there's a massive potential of doing carbon offsetting through the protection of, large trees. And so we really have to look at how can you actually put a value of $500 on a tree like this? And that's what poverty drives you to do. And they will do, they want a phone, they want a fridge, they want a washing machine, and why shouldn't they have it? And actually, that's the way, and that's exactly what we did too. Our ancestors did the same. And so, how can we find a positive way to be able to keep the forest standing by doing, carbon offsetting? Now, this is the kind of scale of deforestation that we're looking at in the Amazon, but this is okay as far as industry says, because they've got wildlife corridors. And as long as you leave wildlife corridors, then it's okay. And it's like, hang on, is this really okay? It's not okay if you're a jaguar. And so, but this is how they get away with massive, large-scale deforestation. And of course, palm oil, we all know about palm oil, and that is the main, one of the biggest crops that's driving it. And so I see a lot of this slash and burn. And what happens in tropical forests, it's not like the rich topsoil that we have in this country, where the leaves fall off of the trees and they rot down and they make this lovely soil. But in the tropics, the leaves don't fall off of the trees like that. They're green all year. And so you just don't get such an amazing topsoil. And so what happens is that when people want to grow, they will cut the forest down and burn it, and then they have all this lovely ash. And the ash is lovely and nutritious, and so they will grow their crops for 2 years. By the 3rd year, no roots to hold the earth together, heavy rainfall, all of the earth just washes into the rivers. And so by the 3rd year, you actually can't grow anything, so you have to cut down more forest. So slash and burn is the way that we've been clearing more forest now than ever before. And when I started working in the Amazon 19 years ago, it was all thatched roofs and machetes. And it's really only the last 5 years that I have seen all the men now with chainsaws. Now, one man can only clear so much forest in a day with a machete. Give him a chainsaw, the mighty steel, and petroleum, and we can clear huge amounts of forest. And it's for our appetite for cheap oil, for cheap coffee, for cheap, for chocolate. That's what's driving this continual deforestation. So I had an organisation contact me from London called Rainforest Saver, and they've been working in Honduras and in Cameroon. And they were like, look, we would like to work in the Amazon, and we would like to come and teach you about alley cropping, which is a form of agroecology. And the tree that you can see here is Inga edulis, which is a form of a guava. We put them in alleys. And what happens is that when you pollard that back, all the leaves fall down and they create this soil between the alleys. And then you grow your crops. You cut it right back. And so first of all, as the trees grow up, they're very fast growing endemic trees there. They grow up, they shade it out, which kills all the grass. And then you pollard it back hard, opens the canopy up to light, and then all those leaves will create the mulch in between, which will break down and create fertile soil. It's also a really good nitrogen fixer, and they buy a lot of chemical nitrogen. And where does nitrogen come from? The petroleum companies. And so to stop them having to buy urea, nitrogen, then we've been able to calculate and show them how much nitrogen they're fixing by using these trees. And so I've been doing a lot of training. The first year, we grew 4,000 trees, we trained 400 farmers, and we put in 20 farms. We've now got 65 farms down there where we're, kind of showing that this is, if we can keep training the local farmers and the local youth in different forms of agroecology, showing them how to set up seed nurseries to use this. This is a way that can help them make their own land fertile rather than having to cut down more and more land. Also teaching about climate resilience. So as we are experiencing climate breakdown, in some places, especially on the equator, it's getting more and more extreme, so that they'll grow their crops, they'll lose it from drought, from flooding, or from ice. So it's got so crazy that so many people are leaving growing and just heading to the cities. And so it's like, well, okay, how can we create systems which create more resilience? And this way, what we've been doing here this is mainly in the mountains, is showing that they've been putting up, I've been trying to encourage to have the machines alongside all this plastic. So by collecting the rainwater off of these high structures made out of bamboo and sheeting, so that they can collect the rain when the rain comes, so then they have that when there's drought. It also stops the ice. And they've been able to grow food for a lot longer for their communities. So now this group of people are going around to all the other communities, showing them this kind of way of like, okay, you collect rainwater and then you irrigate it, and that way it makes it more resilient for them to be able to stay on the land rather than going into cities. And when needs must, it's like, they wanted money to get a pump to pump water out of the ground, and then some ingenious guy was like, well, you know what, let's just make a bicycle pump. And that's what they did. And so they're like, this is great, look, we just water up, and we don't need to buy petrol for the generator, and this is a great solution. It does what they need to do, and so they're also now pumping it up when it's dry to keep filling the water systems. So now they've got an infrastructure. It helps them to become a lot more resilient. So that was kind of like an intro to the work that I've been doing with the problems and the solutions. And this is somewhere I think we really need to be going, which is biomimicry. How many people in the room know about biomimicry? Oh, good. There's more in here than normally. Normally there'll be about 2 people put their hands up. There's about 6 or 7 in here. And for me, it's a really exciting time, and especially for youth, it really gives them hope to show that actually there is something that we haven't taken it into consideration, and that is, nature has billions of years of evolution of working things out. All the problems that we're currently facing have been worked out. And Janine Benyus, who really kind of developed the concept of biomimicry, she calls it the conscious emulation of life's genius. So what does that mean? It's conscious, there's an intent there. Emulation, it's about copying. More than copying, learning from and mimicking. Life's genius. All this, the greatest R&D department in the world. And so it's about changing the way we think. Rather than, our kind of manner at the moment is to look at a tree and we want to know what the Latin name is, what the genus is, what conditions does it live, what kind of leaves does it have. We want to know, about the tree. But actually, could we change to wanting to learn from the tree? Not learning about it, but learning from it. How do you pump water? How do you create carbon? How do you do what you do? Why does nature have this branching system, which is seen in everything, whether it's our lungs, or our blood vessels, or in a leaf, or in a tree? There's this same branching method that we see throughout nature. They call it Murray's Law. And that's actually because it's the most efficient way to move water. You start thick and you get thinner and thinner and thinner and thinner. The pressure moves water. What do? We have a hose pipe that's the same thickness. All of our piping, our plumbing, our electric, we have the same thickness pipe. That's not how nature does it. You start with a thick pipe and you get thinner. And that way, you become a lot more efficient. So there are so many examples when we actually look to nature to learn from and to help us at this time to move out of this problem that we're currently facing. So some examples, mussels, limpets, they are good at sticking hard to a rock. But if we were to, humans want to stick something, we use petrochemicals. We use pretty toxic glues. And you wouldn't want to drink most glues. So how does nature do this? How does it stick? Even the crashing waves don't dislodge these. How are they sticking? These beautiful butterflies, these morpho butterflies, which I see in the Amazon. If I want a jacket that's that colour blue and it's waterproof, like their wings are waterproof and this beautiful turquoise. If I want a jacket just like that, what's it made out of? Petrochemicals. Our addiction to petrochemicals, we make everything out of it, but how does nature do it? These wings and the peacock's wings, they're not blue, they're brown. But actually, it's a play on light. Nature's so clever that it's worked out how to make colours just by bending light. How are these wings waterproof? What we've got to learn so that we can mimic and do the same and cut down the huge amount of chemicals that we're using. 750,000 metric tons of chemical dyes in all of our clothes. The fashion industry is the second most toxic industry after the oil and gas industry. The fashion industry is absolutely shocking, especially now with fast fashion. Not just the dyeing of clothes, where there's rivers that are running green and purple. but also the amount that it takes to grow cotton, the amount of water that's needed. Every little insect wants to live in a little cotton ball. So they spray so much pesticides on cotton. They then ship it all around the planet. It's just beyond words. And the dyes that we keep using are just not being questioned. And so when we can look at, all these amazing colours in nature, look at chameleons and, all sorts of these incredible colours. How is nature making these? It's got the same building blocks that we have. We have the same minerals on this planet. How can we actually learn to, produce without creating toxicity? This is another famous example of biomimicry, the bullet train in Japan. That when they first made it, every time it came out of a tunnel, it went boom. As of course there was massive complaints. And that was because it was coming from one density into another. And the engineer that was working on that train at the time, he was also a bird lover. And he watched how a kingfisher could go from the air into the water, from one density to another. And it didn't even make a ripple. So they changed the bullet train to have a really long nose. And as soon as they did that, it meant that it could come out of the tunnels and not make any noise. And then the byproduct of that was that it was much more efficient, used a lot less power, and went a lot faster. So, some of these examples that really have already been used. The Namib beetle in Africa, there is no rain. How does this beetle produce water for itself? And it goes up to the top of a sand dune, and it waits in the morning dew as it comes over, and there's little black bumps on it. And the water is attracted to the shell. And then there's little gutters that run down, and then it just bends forward, and the water just channels through the gutters straight into its mouth. What nature has evolved to deal with. And so they're looking at, well, hang on, we could create these same kind of structures in the desert and create greenhouses in the desert and start growing food in the desert where we start to capture water from the dew. So there's so many ways that we're learning to use these kind of applications. Sharks, they're one of the most evolved creatures that there are. And when they looked at a shark's skin, nothing sticks to it. Even these basking sharks in the Galapagos, which just hang around on the bottom. Now, most other creatures in the sea will get various barnacles and various things will stick to them. But why doesn't the shark have anything sticking? And it's because of the platelets. And the way that the platelets are formed means that nothing can stick. No bacteria, nothing can stick. So what about even if we were to change the surfaces of tables in hospitals? What do we do now? Chemicals, clean, chemicals. We're constantly cleaning restaurants and hospitals and doorknobs. And if we just created a different structure, we wouldn't even have to clean it. It would just mean that bacteria just couldn't adhere to it. It's a totally different way of thinking. Speedo even copied the shark skin and made this swimming costume that's been banned in the Olympics because it gives an unfair advantage. Those swimmers that wear it swim faster. LED lights. When they first made LED lights, they were so tiny, they just did not shine very brightly. And so they looked to the fireflies. Well, how does this little tiny creature shine so brightly? And they realised that the stomach isn't round, it's jagged, has lots more edge to it. So when they changed the LED light to have a jagged edge, all of a sudden, it shone a lot brighter. So we can see all the different examples of applications that biomimicry can be used. And we're still not using it as fast as we need to. A whale's fin, it's not random that it has this pectoral fin that has a jagged edge. It means that that huge mass of body can move more efficiently through the water. So if we were to change propellers on boats and wind turbines to not have straight edges, but to have a jagged edge, they would all become more efficient. So we can see it in so many ways that it's just about looking and learning. Architecture, another great example in Africa. How they've just built this massive new apartment building and it has no air conditioning. air conditioning is the number one worst thing for climate change, which is kind of amazing. We used to talk about CFCs, and that were creating a hole in the ozone layer. And we stopped CFCs, but we replaced them with HFCs, which are even worse. They are for the warming, it works out as the number one thing we need to stop immediately is these HFCs. So all refrigeration and all air conditioning is going to have to be changed. And according to supposedly 2025, they're not going to be able to use it anymore. And so we're starting to find out about the different gases which are creating global warming. And so to build a huge apartment block in Africa that does not have any air conditioning, and how they did it was that the architects went and they looked at the termite mound. In the middle of the desert, it's hot in the day and it's cold at night. And how, if you take a temperature right in the middle of that termite mound, it stays at exactly the same temperature. And it's the venting inside which creates this ambient temperature, which is never too hot and never too cold and just stays the same. And so the architects did exactly the same. And they created this building. So there are so many patterns in nature. And we have to kind of question why. Why does nature use these patterns? Because they're stronger, they're more efficient, they're more effective. So looking, and really I encourage you when you're out walking in nature to really have a look and see what patterns you can find and start asking the questions, why are you like that? Why do you have that pattern? What can I learn from this pattern? It's a good example of how they've been using the sunflower and the way that the sunflower, the efficient way that the seeds are held and the way that the sunflower rotate in these, which are the concentrated solar power plants. So this is really kind of the solar of the future, which is much more efficient than solar panels. So these are mirrors. One tiny little mirror you can create a fire with. So you imagine these massive mirrors that are all focusing at that central tower. Creates a huge amount of energy, and the way that they're laid out, like the sunflower, so that it's more efficient again to be able to have the sun rays bouncing off of those mirrors. But then we can talk about renewable energy, and solar and wind and tidal and all the amazing, which is inevitable as we move into the ecological age. But what we mustn't forget is now in outer Mongolia, we're creating these new pits. And these new toxic pits come from wind turbines, solar panels, and smartphones and electric cars. So we have to look at the method that we use to produce anything. Whether it's a solar panel or an electric car, we can't kid ourselves by thinking that they are actually ecological because of the manufacturing process. We are still stuck in this paradigm of mine it, make it, dump it. Mine it, make it, dump it. That's the way we work. And that's what we really have to challenge, is the way that we manufacture. I mean, everyone's got a smartphone in their pocket, probably totally oblivious to how many minerals are actually in it. And where did those minerals come from? And I know someone that has massive solar farms. We went out for lunch one day and I said to him, so what do you do with all your waste? He's like, what? And I said, well, when you're building all the solar panels and you're mining the materials that are needed and you're building the solar, what do you do with your waste? And he put his hand on his heart and he just said, oh, Nicola, please don't ask. I was like, that's my job. What do you mean don't ask? We have to question this. We can't just keep making stuff without looking at the life cycle of where it's going. And so now these pits in Mongolia, where it's just conveniently being dumped, we're not questioning the actual processing of what we're making. This is nature's waste. Yeah? Nature makes that shell out of the very sand. And when it's broken and it's no good, it returns back to that sand. It's a perfect closed-loop system. So nature is not bringing anything. It's not to create that shell. It's using on-site resources. It's not mining something from the other side of the world and then bringing it over there and using like high temperatures. And the way that we build is heat it, beat it, and treat it. We use very intense high chemicals, we use high pressure and high temperature in pretty much most things that we make. But how, when we look, and this is another great example through and through with biomimicry, is that you can see that, hang on, nature has exactly the same building blocks, that, and it's not that, one of the great things is this idea that humans and nature are separate in some way, which of course, it's like, how can we even come to that point where we think that, well, nature's the woods, it's the forest, and where we go on holiday, and where we go walking, and that humans in our cities, we're separate from it. And the way that we manufacture and the way we make things is like this. But actually, when we humble ourselves to look at, well, how does nature do this? How do we make it? You look to a spider. How does a spider on dead flies and water make a spider's thread, which is, one of the strongest materials known? And there is actually now a company in San Francisco, Bolt Threads, that have asked the spider, how do you do that? How do you create out of dead flies and water this amazing fibre? And they've learned, and they have now made the first human-made spider web by learning the exact protein molecules that the spiders use. So it's about changing the way that we question and learning from nature. Because, packaging, we have a major issue with packaging. Nature does packaging really well. There's all sorts of packaging. Hard packaging, soft packaging, there's all sorts of packaging. So it's already worked out packaging. And, we are still stuck with the issue of packaging. And we're moving on. These are the wiki pearls, which are edible packaging. We'll start to see a lot more of this coming through, this edible packaging, where, you can either eat it or just put it in your compost, but it doesn't need, and this is ice cream, yogurts, all kinds of things like that can actually be held in this natural-based packaging. But then Coca-Cola have come out with their plant bottle. And, so of course Coca-Cola are feeling really good about themselves because now they've made this like bioplastic bottle. And then you question, well, okay, it's not made out of petroleum plastic, but what's it made out of? It's made out of sugarcane plastic. And then I kind of look at the Amazon, I was like, oh my goodness, they're cutting down more forest. Sugarcane needs a lot of water, gets sprayed. And so it's like, well, hang on, so now we're creating a food crop to be turned into plastic. Is that really the idea? This is a packaging made out of mushrooms. Myco-packaging, and using mycelium in lots of ways, not just to clean up oil spills, but to create packaging, to do insulation. Myco-insulation will be coming through soon. And I met recently the guys that are working with myco-insulation. And you can basically grow it to whatever form and to whatever shape that you want. And so it's very much like polystyrene in that it's insulating capacities and the way that it protects things. So mycelium, being used in lots of ways as a totally natural packaging has got a lot to really kind of offer us. And then we have this Veuve Clicquot champagne, which, they're very proud of themselves as well because they've made the most eco-packaging that there is. They say that it's not from tree pulp, the actual box itself. It's made from their own waste, their own grape waste. And the inks are used from soya-based natural inks, and even the sticker is stuck on with like sugarcane adhesive. But you do have to question, does a bottle need to go in a box? Yes, you can call it an eco box, but actually how much energy has it taken to make the box, to make the ink, to make the glue, to make the label? It's kind of, really like challenging our whole concept of packaging and moving into this closed loop system. And we know very much closed loop, when we talk about compost, that is a classic closed loop system. But we're not talking enough about technical nutrients and how we need to close the cycle on technical nutrients. And that's so that when manufacturers actually build phones and computers and what other gadgets they're making, they take into consideration the the way that they use those minerals and the birth and the death of the product so that it can be taken back out. So the design in itself is to be able to reutilise those same nutrients that are already there. Because closed-loop systems, it financially makes sense as well. I mean, this is actually a beer company. And so, your standard beer company just makes beer and the rest of it's looked at as waste. But this Zeri systems are very into kind of like closed-loop systems. And so you can see like all of the different waste products, what they're able to use from the waste. They also then are able to, grow mushrooms and sell bread and create biogas and create compost. And there's a lot of other side products which make the system financially sensible as well as environmentally. It's looking at waste and seeing waste as a resource. And that can be in many, many different ways. So the final part is, looking at, coming back to as an individual. What can I do? I mean, some of this seems so overwhelming, of like, well, no, I can't go to the Amazon and, start using mushrooms to clean up oil spills, or, biomimicry. It's great if you know any students who are going to university. We need to question the way we make stuff, totally. We need a systems change. And a system change is political, legal, economical, social, and individual. All of those threads in the tapestry need changing because the system itself just doesn't work. So buying renewable energy, it's obvious, but still we talk about, yes, we need to buy more renewable, we need to all move into the ecological age, but still a lot of people think that it must be more expensive or just don't know that you can actually change over to a renewable provider. And so once you've changed your own company over to a renewable provider, then, encourage your workplaces and educational institutions and faith institutions to ensure that where does the power come from here? Is the power in this building coming through from the sun and the wind? Or where's it coming from? And so this is a very simple way that, if we want change, we need to demand it. We live in a world of supply and demand. And so the more that all of us start demanding to buy renewable energy, then the quicker we start building more infrastructure. And it, surprisingly, for a lot of people, actually works out cheaper as well. People can save money by going onto renewables. There's actually, it's called the Big Clean Switch. And the Big Clean Switch, you put in your postcode and it will tell you what's your cheapest renewable provider and how you can get renewables coming into your house for a lower cost than you would have with E.ON or EDF or any of the other big providers. So this way of we need this systems change. We need to start, reducing the amount of fossil fuels and supporting renewable energy. Divesting. The divest movement is so important. We have to look at the economical key as well, which Mark Carney, the head of the Bank of England, is saying it's not good investment to have your money in fossil fuels. That makes sense. It's common sense, but of course, common sense is not common. And I'm asked to go and speak for fracking groups, anti-fracking, and they chose to drill in the wrong place. They've been drilling in my village. Bad idea. And but I'm actually very proud to say that last year in the High Court there was an injunction and my name was throughout it, and they referred to me as Japanese knotweed. I mean, I take that as the greatest compliment I've ever had, actually, because that stuff is not going away, and you just don't want it around you. So that's how the oil companies feel about me. And so basically, they just shouldn't have drilled in my village, and of course, I'm going to speak out against what they're doing. But I can ask to go and speak for a load of people that are anti-fracking, although I don't actually use the word fracking myself when I'm talking about it, because it's a very divisive word. It's much better to just talk about, oil and gas and fossil fuels and climate breakdown and all of the other parts of it. But I'll say to everybody, well, hey, you're all really against this, and so I take it that nobody's got their money in Barclays. It's like, well, they're the ones that support the fracking in the UK. And it's like, so we need to actually move our money. That's the economic strand. And what's really powerful is that when we do move our money, and it's not that hard to move our bank account, but we all just stay with the same bank account because it's the easiest thing, it's what we've always done, and we've always had the same bank and it just does the thing. But when we close our account, they have to ask you why. Why are you closing your account? And you say, because I'm really worried about climate change. And you're investing in fossil fuels. And I really don't agree. And if you don't have an ethical policy which does not invest in fossil fuels, I don't want to be a part of it. The more people that start saying that to the banks, there has to be change. And it's really worth reading, like the Co-op. The Co-op is the only high street bank that has an ethical policy. And when you read the ethical policy of the Co-op, it's amazing. It says, we do not invest in fossil fuels, in nuclear, in the arms trade, in animal testing, in GMOs. That's like, great, well, I believe that. And so these banks that do have an ethical policy, Triodos, that's one of the best banks that there are. And so, as we move our money, we also move that economical part, which is funding the fossil fuel industry as it is, without us even knowing. We don't know that our money and our pensions is all being invested in fossil fuels. The council, it's really anyone, that wants to take this one on, it's really important to get the councils to divest. The councils, huge amounts of money the councils put into fossil fuels, into the pension schemes. And there's a lot of groups which are working on the divest movement. Lots of universities, student groups are rising up and getting the student unions to divest. So anybody involved in any educational institutions as well, please bring this to the table. It's really important that we start talking about divest. We really have to look at the legal structure, and the legal structure needs changing. We need to call it by its name, and its name is ecocide. That is what's happening. The images that I've been showing you of massive oil spills, of massive deforestation, of massive contamination, is ecocide. Now, we all know about genocide, and at its side, under the Rome Statute, the crimes against peace, crimes against humanity, was ecocide. It's a crime to pollute the earth, and for our water and our air and our earth, that's a crime, and somebody needs to be held responsible for that. And at the 11th hour, ecocide was pulled out. Genocide went through, and we all know about genocide. And Polly Higgins, dear friend of mine, who has just passed on, and I will forevermore, hold her name and speak clearly of her. She will be somebody that will go down in the future as like the next William Wilberforce, because she was just too ahead of her time. We weren't ready for that. But we have to start naming it as it is. We are currently experiencing an ecocide, and there are people that need to be held responsible for that. The CEO of Shell, the CEO of big oil companies, of big petrochemical companies, they know what they're doing. They know they're contaminating the earth and the air and the water. They know they're doing it, and they still choose to do it anyway. So if they have an incident like what we've seen, they need to be held responsible personally. The trouble with corporate power is that you can't put the corporation in jail, but you can put an individual. So if you're the CEO of one of these companies, or the director, or the head of state, you need to be criminally prosecuted for what you've done. And when the law comes through, the law of ecocide, it will be a massive game changer. And I really, highly recommend all of you to become earth protectors. Good. And, it's really important that we declare that I believe that ecocide is wrong, and that it's being a conscientious objector. So it's the same as when the men didn't go to war. They got through that because morally they didn't believe in war. Morally, we don't believe in ecocide. And so people that are choosing to get arrested now, when they get arrested, if they have signed up to ecocide, they can hold that piece of paper up to the judge, and they can show that this is a legally binding document. And this document says that you morally believe so much that this is wrong, that you're acting on your morals. And no judge can argue on your morals. You're doing what is right for you. And so that's why it is so important I've just made up these little flyers. They're on the back there, and it's a double-sided flyer. I think there's two different ones. But I kind of realised that there's these big movements with the climate marches, with the youth, with the Extinction Rebellion, and there's a lost opportunity that's happening there too, because a lot of people go to these marches and then they go home and carry on as normal. I said, actually, we need to know what we can do. People need to be told point by point what to do. And so this is what I have created, is this, the planet needs you, what can you do? And one of my missions, I'm speaking at Glastonbury, is to put one up in every single toilet. Because it's like this way, that's a captive audience there. And how do we actually get people to realise, we need to start looking at the system change and what we need to do. And this is another really great book, and there's an app and everything, the Good Shopping Guide, so that when we make our purchases, we know who are we giving our money to? Who are we supporting? Because of course, every purchase we make is a vote. We vote for that company by giving them our money. We believe in them or we don't believe in them.
Nicola,
Yeah.
I'm just wondering whether this could continue in your workshop, just so that the other workshop leaders get a chance to say that.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just going to wrap it up now. This is the last couple of slides. So, yeah, regenerative agriculture. Yeah.
Talking about what we can and can't do, I just have to say good praise for the West Sussex County Council, because on Environment Day they are getting everybody in the county to sign up to help save resources and our environment on Climate Pledge. And there's a whole load of things individually that actually most of us here would know about, many people don't, that we can do in our daily lives.
Yeah, I mean, we are going to go into kind of detail on all this, and I just wanted to bring it up for everybody, like the main points that we need to look at in this system change. Agriculture is a massive part of what's creating climate breakdown as well. The elephant in the room is obviously flying. Carbon emissions just keep going up from flying. They're not going down. All the other emission trading schemes are going down. The carbon from flying is just keeping on going up. We talk about, the 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. We don't talk about refuse and rot. They're the two important R's that seem to get forgotten about. It's actually, rather than recycling it, just refuse it in the first place. We all are onto this. We know to not have single-use plastic, but how can we actually take it, one step further? And it's really just buy less stuff. It's the stuff that causes the problems. It's just generally for us all to just buy less. I mean, there's so many ways that we can just get involved. And a part of that is on a community level as well. Getting involved with other groups, whether it's the Transition Town or the permaculture movement, or there's so many movements that are doing something. They're coming together in community groups, planting more trees and doing something real and something really useful. So, this kind of gives us, I think we can't do it alone. We really do have to start coming together in groups. So, that's given you a lot of information, and hopefully you will learn something new. And so we're going to go into our different workshops now, and we'll be kind of exploring this a lot more. So, yeah.
Okay.